I worked on the oral care business at Procter & Gamble for a really long time.
Like toothpaste?
Yeah. Like Crest, Oral-B.
Yeah.
And Sensodyne just did great. They were owned by GlaxoSmithKline and they were growing like crazy. And it was like, I never understood why in the heck they're a smaller player. Why are they grabbing so much share? But they had a really interesting strategy. And I've since like kind of tried to mimic that strategy and other stops along the way. Basically what they did is they said, look, I can't compete with Colgate or Procter & Gamble in terms of scale, budget, all the rest of the stuff, but I can own sensitive teeth. I am going to be associated as a brand with sensitive teeth. And once I am 100% associated as the one that owns sensitive teeth, I'm going to convince the whole freaking country that they have sensitive teeth. And then I'm going to take share from everybody else.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to Run the Numbers, the show where we talk to the people behind the P&L about strategy, metrics, leadership, even sales in this one. Oh yeah, because today's guest is Daniel Lentz, CFO of BigCommerce. If his title makes him sound like your standard spreadsheet savvy operator, think again. Daniel's career started in full-time sales and part-time seminary. Fast forward 20 years and he's helped take an e-commerce platform public during a global pandemic. In this episode, we cover how going to grad school during the 2008 financial crisis with a young family to support shaped his approach to resilience and risk, what it means to be operator first in the CFO seat, and how his time carrying a quota still shapes how he works with sales and marketing today, how to spot a good sales comp plan and a sandbagger, and why it's okay, maybe even necessary, for attrition to run higher in your sales org, the fine line between empathy and accountability, and how to build a culture where top performers are empowered and poor performers are not protected, whether multi-touch attribution is the answer or the headache, and how finance can help bridge the classic sales marketing divide without becoming the referee. Finally, we talk about why output metrics without input clarity are like knowing you've got cockroaches but not knowing where the nest is, and how he finds the root cause when metrics go sideways. Plus, in the lightning round, we talk about learning on the job as a first-time CFO and first-time public company CFO. Wow, cutting through noisy investor advice. Not all of it's good, and the weirdest thing someone's ever tried to expense. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Listen, being a CFO, it's not always that glamorous. Sometimes I find myself watering the plants and taking out the garbage in the office. And, the best CFOs I know they're true business leaders. They know how to drive growth in heroic fashion. Unfortunately, the status quo of finance makes that really hard because day to day, we're mostly up to our eyeballs in spreadsheets and receipts. Thankfully, there's a financial provider who has built a solution to match your ambition, Brex. Brex designed a modern corporate card and spend platform that controls spend proactively and automates tedious expense and accounting tasks. Brex frees up CFOs to focus on the high-impact projects that drive growth. The shit that's actually worth your CFO time. So how does Brex work? You can embed your expense policy inside the corporate card to prevent out-of-policy spend before it happens. Receipts and memos are auto-generated, so you always have what you need to close the books fast. Managers get freed up from reviewing, every possible expense under the sun because in-policy expenses are auto-approved, and AI will flag any exceptions. And all the while, your expense detail is syncing with your ERP because Brex integrates with almost all of them. I love that, from QuickBooks to NetSuite. It's your time to shine as the strategic growth driver you are, and Brex can make it easy. More than 30,000 companies like DoorDash, Coinbase, and SeatGeek use Brex to make every dollar and every minute count. Join them at brex.com/metrics. That's brex.com/metrics. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. And so I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. So I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com, aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials and making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit RightRev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's RightRev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. Daniel, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast.
Hey, CJ, thanks for having me.
I'm like 175 guests in, and I think you take the cake as the guest with the most interesting career arc.
That, I don't know if that's a compliment or it just shows that like I have commitment issues or I've just been led down a weird path.
It's a compliment because you've stacked your experiences to become this public company CFO. If I have it right though, at one point you were a sales leader, you were a sales rep, and you were also an aspiring pastor in the seminary. Is that right?
Yeah, I was. My background is kind of weird. I talk to investors about this a lot because it's just, I never set out to be a CFO.
Yeah.
Like it was never like something that I like intended to do. So my background makes more sense if you meet my wife. Like my wife is like absolutely incredible. And I got out of undergrad early so that I could work her way through school when I was at the University of Texas. And so I needed a job when I graduated. And so the job that I could find was as an inside sales rep in Austin. And so I did that job. I was at Dell. And so I did that for a couple of years until she had finished her undergrad program. And then I moved to the New York area when I went out into field sales. But that whole time, my intention was to finish seminary and become a pastor. So I was like a part-time seminary student. And then when we moved to the New York area, the main intention was like just pay off all our debt, save as much money as we can so that I could finish seminary. And then one thing led to another. And then I realized I, kind of enjoyed being in the business world. It's still like huge passion area of my life. But yeah, so then I was in sales all through my 20s. I didn't actually work on salary until I was in my 30s, ironically. So it's just my background is just a little strange for a CFO, I guess.
I want to just go back to that comment you just made. You didn't work on salary until you were in your 30s?
No, until I was 30. It was, you have a mix. It's like I lived on the sales comp plans that I now design and enforce. And so it's kind of a different way of looking at it. So it's, all through my 20s, I was essentially your typical acquisition outside B2B salesperson. So I worked at Dell, and then I had a group, I was in a group that specialized in accounts that either like hated us and refused to work with us or had just fired us. And my job was to, I'd get a territory, and my job was to cold call my way in and get them to fire HP and IBM and switch over to us. So I did that all through my 20s. And then at 28, I think, went back to grad school because I wanted to go into commercial real estate. And so I went to Cornell for grad school. So I got a master's in real estate, did an MBA kind of as a backup. And then I'm like, well, my family business is real estate, so I just want to do real estate. And then I graduated 2 months after Lehman Brothers went under. And so I had a good friend at the time. I remember he called me because I graduated in December from the second program. And he was like, hey, I can refer you to Procter and Gamble. I think you do really well in corporate finance. And I said, CFO track, consumer products, Cincinnati, Ohio. Like, no. I'm not interested in any of those things. And he was like, well, the world's ending. It's 2008. You need a job. Do you want a job? And I'm like, actually, a job sounds nice. And so then I went, and I absolutely loved P&G. It was like getting another degree. Anyway, so then that's how I kind of ended up on the path that kind of took me to where I am now. Because P&G is such a wonderful place to work from a training perspective, and did a number of different roles there, and then went to an affiliate marketing company, and then joined BigCommerce to help lead us through the IPO process, and then took over as CFO about 2 years ago. So I've done a whole host of different things and a whole host of different departments that I'm responsible for now. So it kind of prepared me for where I am, but I didn't like leave undergrad and then like have this plan. Like you meet the CFOs, they either like, they went into banking and then switched to corporate, or they went into audit and then switched to corporate. I was a seminary student that was a cold calling salesperson, and then just kind of life in the economy, and ended up where I am.
In many ways, your background has similarities to Howard Wilson, the CFO of PagerDuty. He's like, I never struck out to be a public company CFO or take a company public. Like I was on the sales and partnership side for most of my career. I was a chief commercial officer, chief revenue officer. And he's like, now I have a level of empathy for the quotas I set. I think that like you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah. I mean, I think I enjoy it because like I've always just kind of thought of myself as a GM with a finance badge, but it's not about me. It's never been about me. I've just kind of busted my butt in whatever role that I was in, and, ended up where it is. It's not an easy job being a CFO of a public company. CFO of a private company is hard too. So it's, it's not an easy gig, that's for sure, but it's certainly challenging when I really like. But anyway, so I have a bit of a weird background.
I love it. And you've described yourself as a professional operator, which I think is pretty humble for someone who's helped steer a company through an IPO in a pandemic, nonetheless.
In retrospect, by the way, not a great time to IPO a company. It's not exactly a normal environment to price a book. But anyway, keep going.
Sage advice there. Yeah. What's your version of being operator first in the CFO seat? What does that mean for you?
Well, I mean, I think there's different versions of CFOs that I've encountered. You've got, and usually folks are some combination of different skills. You'll have folks that they really love deal making. They love M&A. They're really, really focused on audit and accounting, kind of the controller cloth that ends up into a CFO chair. I've done so many different things. Like I tend to gravitate into the weeds of the way the company is operating. And so for me, when I say professional operator, it's kind of my way of saying like, look, I kind of pride myself on being fairly boring. Like I'm not out trying to do some real clever capital stack stuff. If somebody accused me of being hand wavy, that would be like the biggest insult any investor could ever give me. I want to talk about growth rates, how are comp plans set up? Like, how are we managing our capital? Or like, I'm kind of the person that loves being the number two that's behind the scenes, kind of just running things. My job is to maximize the value of an asset. And I think for me, it's like, I just tend to gravitate towards the operations to do that.
That resonates with me. Like I've always been, I'll call it like the price times quantity guy. Like I'm going to build it up and then try to go and hire the right people to go and hit quota and build the sales capacity plan. Like talking about, strategic capital structure and taking on debt and what you're like.
I mean, I understand it, right? But like if things get really, sometimes I feel like my job is like, I need to know enough to call BS on the experts in 10 different areas. And sometimes I think bankers, like they make a career out of taking simple to understand things and they make it as jargon laden as they can to make people think it's really complicated that nobody else can understand. The really, really good banking partners don't do that. But the ones that I've found that I just kind of roll my eyes at, it's like, it's not really that complicated. I need to know enough to be able to pick really good partners in lots of different areas. But I kind of feel like I need to know 40% of everything and then know when I've hit 41 to call in somebody else so that I can kind of handle the span of what I need to manage.
There's something to be said about having like a good BS detector as a skill. Like you don't have to know the answer, but you just have to know what's up.
Yeah. And you can kind of tell, like, I don't know, like people always paraphrase Warren Buffett and he probably never even said it. He's like the Sphinx of American business. And you're like, you just attribute things to him. But I read something one time where he said something to the effect of like, if I don't understand it, I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
And I remember like when I started in graduate school in particular, I kind of had like a little bit of like I don't know, like one part inferiority complex and one part like imposter syndrome, where I got there and I'm like, no, I'm gonna have to I'm just gonna need to outwork everybody that's here because they're probably all smarter than me. And for a while, and then again, this is like the peak of the financial crisis bubble, because I was in grad school in 06, 07, and 08. And I remember I would be in classes, like I was in one class on like securitization and financial products, right? And so literally the final exam was they gave us like a Morgan Stanley prospectus on mortgage-backed securities. And the final exam was to build the financial model to price all the different tranches and all the different instruments, right? And I remember as we were going through, we were talking about it afterwards with the professor, and I asked the question, well, what was the right answer? What are all these different instruments worth? And his response was, well, we don't know. There is no right answer. It's a matter of opinion. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know, man, that sounds freaking scary to me. And then I was like, at the time, I'm like, maybe I'm just not smart enough and this is normal. And I've kind of found as the years have gone on, I'm like, I'm plenty smart enough to smell BS. Like if you get 50 smart people in the room and none of them can get within 50% of evaluation of each other, there's a problem there. Like that's not good.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. This episode of Run the Numbers is brought to you by Navan, the all-in-one travel and expense solution. CFOs and finance leaders, let's be honest here. Your T&E process is broken. Manual reconciliations waste valuable time, policy violations drain money, and limited visibility creates unnecessary risk. Nobody likes that. Navan cuts through these problems, giving finance teams the clarity and control needed to close with confidence, faster and with fewer headaches. Connect your existing eligible Visa, MasterCard, or American Express cards directly to Navan and keep all your card rewards and banking relationships. Get real-time expense tracking, automated policy enforcement, and AI-powered reconciliation that works. Companies like Anthropic, Unilever, and Zoom trust Navan to manage travel spend smarter and increase compliance. Are you ready to modernize your T&E process? Visit navan.com/runthenumbers for your demo today. That's navan.com/runthenumbers. Tell them CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. Bull market, bear market. Rates will rise, rates will fall. Can someone please just invent a crystal ball already? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their companies with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. Whether you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If you listen to this podcast, you'll know I ask CFOs all the time to rep their tech stacks, and I would say almost every one of them use NetSuite. And that's what I would use too. Whether you're a company earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/metrics. The guide is free to you. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, it's netsuite.com/metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. As a CFO, you're expected to bring clarity to everything, including how your company manages ownership. The tools you use should make that easier, not harder. But when they come with hidden fees, data you can't always trust, and support you can't rely on, you end up with more frustration than clarity. That's where Pulley comes in. Pulley is the cap table management platform built for finance leaders who need accurate, decision-ready data from a system that works for your business, not against it. With Pulley, you get intuitive workflows, audit-ready reporting, and support you can count on, all backed by predictable pricing you can plan around, so you can stay compliant and make smarter decisions about your company's future. Manage everything from fundraise modeling to ASC 718 reporting to custom liquidity programs, all on one trusted platform. Hundreds of high-growth companies like Linear, Fathom, and Runway trust Pulley to help turn ownership into a strategic advantage, and joining them is now easier than ever. You can switch to Pulley in as little as 5 days, and for a limited time, they're offering 25% off your first year. To claim your exclusive offer, visit pulley.com/mostlymetrics. That is pulley.com/mostlymetrics. Pulley.com/mostlymetrics.
One of the reasons why I love doing this podcast is I believe finance as a profession is more opaque than others. And there is kind of this wall that people put up where they want to sound smarter. They want to make things more complicated. And I don't know if it's like a scarcity complex.
I think it's a form of insecurity, by the way. I feel like it's a form of insecurity.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
If you can't explain it in simple terms, I think either you don't understand it or you're trying to make it sound complicated for your own reasons. But anyway, I interrupted you, CJ.
No. The example I always go back to is like when you ask somebody, like, explain what's in cost of goods sold or how you get to gross margin. Like, that's my favorite example of people being super hand wavy of like what's going on in there. And you're like, you're trying to make this sound complicated just because you're not sure yourself what's going on.
I think so too. I remember when I worked at Procter & Gamble, there was this amazing, the P&G kind of lived by like one pagers. You would write these documents to explain things. They actually sent us to training classes on how to write a proper one pager. And then I'd laugh because people would send me one pagers now as pre-reads and they're like 8 pages long and I like want to throw it out.
That's Amazon, 6-page or whatever.
Yeah, I've heard that reputationally. But anyway, I remember there was one internal memo that got circulated from the CFO at the time. It was not the CEO, but it was a great memo that basically he was just blasting everybody for the pre-reads. And he was like, look, if you send it to me in a pre-read and then go through it again with me, once I'm in the room, you're either assuming I didn't read it or you're just trying to be heard. And then he was like, look, if you can't explain it, the business decision in 1 page or less, either you don't understand it or you think I don't understand it, but you should be able to explain anything kind of that concisely. And so usually I'm kind of like, things are really not that ultimately all that complicated, I think. Yeah.
And it gets even worse when people start throwing around acronyms. Like if you need an acronym playbook for where you work, like I wouldn't do well there.
Man, it's so hard not to do that. But I remember I had a grad school professor one time that laughed about this. And he said he always liked using the word stochastic.
What does that even mean?
It's random. All it means is random. It's just a synonym for the word random. But he said he felt so much smarter by referring to things as stochastic. And it was almost like a joke whenever he wanted to sound fancy. It was like this inside joke. He'd start talking about how stochastic things were. And just anyway, made me laugh.
If you add a British
accent. I don't
accent.
know how we got on the topic in the first place, by the way.
But back to BS detectors. So you've worked in sales yourself. Do you feel like you got a pretty good BS detector when it comes to talking the talk with the best sales reps?
I think so. I mean, I find there's a big difference sometimes between top sales reps and top sales leaders. And there's like a transition you have to go through.
Say more. This is interesting.
Well, so it's like top sales reps will just want to maximize their commission. They want to get a deal done. And you don't mind that behavior, right? Like we design comp plans to reward top attainment and achievers and the rest of it. But they're very myopic or tend to be fairly myopic about how they focus on like what's best for them. Whereas a sales leader typically used to be a great sales rep. But when you flip from one to the other, now all of a sudden the sales leader has to think about how they're actually managing their acquisition costs. You know, how are they balancing? Like it's possible for too many people to blow out their number and buy too much. And now all of a sudden, like you have to go from the mode where you were doing everything you can to maximize what you made to now all of a sudden seeing it as a problem if everybody's doing that, if it's not the underlying result. And you have to almost become more accountably altruistic. That might be the wrong way to put it. You know what I mean? But it's akin to like, I talk a lot when I have like first time managers in one of my teams, right? It's the first time they get a people management role. And I'll tell them it's like a common like flip that people have to make where like the behaviors as an individual contributor that first gets you promoted into manager are not the same behaviors that are going to help you advance further. Because like when your team starts doing badly, a first-time manager will sometimes feel like they need to jump in and start telling the ICs how to do their job because they used to do it better than them. That's how they got promoted. But then as soon as they do that, they're communicating that they could never take on a broadening span. And now they're kneecapping their employees and they're not teaching and training. And now they're like massively limiting themselves. Like I feel like in a lot of different career paths, there's like these flip moments where like what's best for an individual contributor is different for a manager, which is very different from an executive even. And not all folks, some folks are really good at one, but not necessarily another.
What's also fascinating is if you find yourself where like you were like pretty good, maybe you're like a B plus at the IC role. I always find this fascinating. And then you're like an A plus. And the example that I go back to is I worked with the CTO many years ago. And he was like, I was like a good coder. He's like, but I'm way better at managing the team of coders.
Yeah, but because he used to be a coder, he can manage a team of coders because he knows enough to call BS. So it's like you need to have gone through that process, but it is just different. And I can think of a lot of examples in different roles that I've had in different departments where it's like, man, I didn't handle that well. or man, I didn't do that well.
Really?
Like, and now, yeah, oh God, yeah. And now I look back and I'm like, and it's like similar behaviors, all throughout as you kind of look back and, if you're wise, you kind of learn from them and you try to get better at them. But I tend to be pretty, even everything from employees to coworkers, even investors, I tend to kind of err on blunt honesty.
Yeah.
Because it's just, again, it's the BS threshold thing. I don't really have much of a tolerance for it.
Daniel, you've said that top salespeople should indeed make a lot of money. You should write them a big check, but that base level attrition should be higher in sales than in other departments. What's your philosophy on the kind of team you're trying to build over time?
So I think that, like, if I were to think about key things that are really good sales comp plan and how it relates to the people, what it should look like, a lot of it comes from my experience from being on the other side of the table as a sales rep. In my early career, I had a really adversarial relationship with finance, right? Like, we had discrete quarterly quotas. And so it was reset every single quarter. My quotas went up on average 40% per quarter, just on average. And it was like, I was always kind of young on the teams that I was in, and I had great mentors, which was great. But like, I'd step in and I always got the part of everybody else's territory that they didn't want. And then they accumulate it and throw it to the new guy, which is fine. But like, I always felt like I was doing this cat and mouse thing with finance, where it was like, if I talked too much about where I was making progress or deals I thought I was going to land, boom, next quarter it was baked into my number and I couldn't make any money on it. I couldn't get any accelerators out of it. So to me, let me answer the comp design question first, and then how it relates to kind of attrition and that type of thing. But from a comp design perspective, to me, the first thing is, like, I want to make sure that there's no adversarial relationship between the people that own the company forecast and the reps that are actually delivering the top line, because it all comes back to revenue at the end of the day, right? And so, like, for me, I'm a big believer that you set quotas at the beginning of the year, and there should be almost no reason where you change quotas midstream if you can avoid it, right? Like, I think that the duration of a quota should match what's a typical, if possible, sales cycle. So if it takes you 6 months to get through a sales cycle, people's quotas, they shouldn't be resetting their attainment every 90 days. Like, I'm a big believer in annual quotas, because otherwise, I mean, I used to game this when I was a rep. Like, I knew twice a year my quota, I was going to get screwed. And so you end up cat and mousing what deals you know about and how much you talk about it. Because I knew, like, well, look, if I'm going to get 80% attainment 2 out of the 4 quarters, I want to get to 130, 140 in the other 2. So I'm in accelerators. But then the problem when you're in my chair now is now all of a sudden your cost to sales is above the midline, but you're missing a plan, right? And good sales leaders see that as a problem. Good sales reps are like, awesome, I made a lot of money. And that's really kind of all I need to think about. So, like, number one, I want to see consistency. I don't want to see a cat and mouse. Best alignment I can between the cost of the plan and the amount of money that the reps make. And then the second thing I like to see is I like to see really good dispersion between really good reps and the reps that are not performing well. Typically, like, there's a lot of best practices around this. Like, the Alexander Group is exceptional. I've worked with them several times in the past. Ironically, this is a topic that doesn't come up much in business school classes, which I really think it should. For anybody wanting to study corporate finance, if you don't understand sales comp design and how this works, I just think your education's incomplete. But I actually like to see attrition a little higher among sales reps, but I want the reps that are performing well, I want them to be some of the top paid people in the entire company, because I think they're worth it. But if they're not performing, they should want to opt out on their own, and then just keep refreshing it.
If you jam up a rep because they give you insights into where the puck is going, like that cuts off your feedback loop going forward on the market.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's absolutely awful. Because the other piece too is, like, a good finance team is helping reps close deals. A good finance team is making sure that the cost of the sales plan is aligned with the volatility in the business that it's driving. You can't have a dislocation where the business is missing, but the reps are making money. So that's the finance accountability part of it. But, like, your best reps, my gosh, they're gold. And so, like, you want to, like, help them blow out their number. But the folks that are kind of just there, like, I'm not, you're not trying to run a sweatshop or something like that. But for the folks that are not missing their number, they're not hustling. Okay, maybe it's time that be good for them to go someplace else and get a fresh start.
Daniel, I have a hot take for you. I got to see if you agree with it. I was talking to somebody last week, and he said, we never let a rep retire more than 150% of their quota on a single deal. Because if the deal is that big, in essence, someone else at the company, like the CEO or CFO or probably the chief product officer, had to help them get it over the line. Do you feel like that's fair?
No, I don't. I disagree with that, actually. There's maybe why I'm more rep friendly. That's why the downside of hiring a former account executive to be a CFO, because I tend to be more rep friendly. I actually believe there's always outliers that you have to look for, right? But I believe there are really good statistical principles that you can look at to kind of manage the outliers within a plan, right? So, for example, when we go through and look at sales plan effectiveness, most of the time when I'm looking at results, I'm looking at histograms and dispersions. I'm not even looking person by person. I want to look at it, and I usually would say, look at a rep's on target earnings or their OTE and say, if they hit their quota, they're going to make this much. Okay. At what level of attainment is no more than 10% of reps historically getting there? That may be 150, maybe 180. If they're managing a huge quota, your top 10% of reps may only be getting to 120, right? But the key is the slopes. It's not the percentage attainment. It's the slope differential between the percentage of OTE they make and the quota attainment. So if somebody is having a number that's almost impossible to blow out and they get to 120, I want them making 200% of their OTE. The person who can more easily get to 180, they need to get to 180 to get to 200 on their payout on OTE. So it adjusts the slope of the payout curve. And the best way to look at that is you just look at historical attainment by role type, which is why you don't change quotas all the time, because then all of a sudden this becomes less and less objective. But what I want is say, all right, I want people to make a lot of money if they're in the top 10%. And I want them to not make much money if they're in the bottom 10%. To your specific question, though, one deal getting them to 150% of their number, that's a much bigger problem when everybody's measurement periods are quarterly. If they have an annual number, it's much harder for one deal to ever equal 150% of your entire annual number, which is part of why I would argue best practice is, unless it's like an inside sales rep or you're selling to small businesses with a really fast sales cycle, it's typically better, I would argue, to do annual quotas, not quarterly. But what you're talking about are bluebird provisions, is what they're typically called, where it's you get this crazy outlier, it's a bluebird, it drops in your lap, and the sales rep got lucky. You don't want them to blow out their number because they got lucky, but it's real hard to get lucky on an annual quota like that. Does that make sense?
It does. And what the person was trying to give to me as a scenario is, let's say it is an annual number. Let's say the rep's quota is $1 million for the year, and they have an account that's linked to them that by luck, they're assigned that account, and they want to buy $2 million worth of software. So it's an enterprise deal. He said, there's no way that rep is going to be able to close a $2 million deal without the support of the product team, without the CEO stepping in and taking a couple meetings. And I'm like, well, isn't that kind of almost like punishing them for...
Yeah, but don't you want them pulling in the CEO?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Don't you want them calling in the product leader? I don't know. I remember when I was in sales, there were certain people I would not allow to join me on a sales call because it was ridiculous. They would say stupid things. I'd have to pick up the pieces after they were done, and I just cut them out. I know I'm supposed to include you, but you literally recorded my last meeting and told the customer you're going to record them like it was a freaking deposition. You're never going into one of my accounts again. I remember having this conversation with somebody, and there's no way. I don't want them feeling that way about people they should be bringing in because they're like, oh, I'm not going to involve our chief revenue officer because as soon as I do, it's going to be argued I didn't do this myself, and therefore finance is going to come in and cap my attainment. I just think it creates a weird, bad incentive system
for the whole company.
Now, for everybody, yeah. Now, if there's somebody who'd been working a deal for a year, and then for whatever reason they left the company, and then you stepped into an open book a week before it closes, okay, well then that's an open book coverage question. There's always policy to smooth the outliers that I think you can do, but the principle of your hot take I disagree with. There are outliers I think you need to manage for. But in principle, no, I think you want to create an incentive system where people involve all the heavy guns they can get to help close important deals.
So if we were to summarize the hallmarks of a good sales compensation plan, it sounds like annual is one of those big tenets, right?
Your quota period should try to mimic as much of the pipeline length as you can, but err on the side of annual. Otherwise, you can end up in a situation where they blow out 2 quarters, miss 2 quarters, but the 2 they blow out, they're in accelerators. So on an annual basis, they're above their total target compensation, but they may miss their annual number. That's a good way to jack up your sales and marketing efficiency.
What other qualities would you call out?
I would say the dispersion issue. Top reps should make a lot of money, and you shouldn't feel bad for paying the top reps a lot of money. And anybody that's never carried a bag, like, doesn't really fully understand that. And I end up defending sales rep perks fairly often. What I don't really have a lot of tolerance for is reps that are not doing a good job and then just they're kind of spoiled. But that's the dispersion issue, right? Like, I let the model sort between the wheat and the chaff, so to speak. But good dispersion, it needs to be consistent, it needs to feel fair. And I would say, as much as you can have commonality of quota by role so that people don't feel like there's any favoritism that goes into how people's quotas are set. You just don't want to have that type of seeds planted of mistrust between sales people and the finance department, in my opinion, because otherwise you're messing up a relationship that can really be collaborative and helpful.
That's awesome. Let's talk about onboarding great sales leaders. What's your internal checklist?
When I'm looking at a new sales leader, I usually, when I'm talking to them, I'm kind of trying to get a sense for, are they going to be able to talk to sales people in the way their brain thinks? And are they going to be able to think in a P&L the way that I need them to think as a sales leader and help me balance the two? Because one's not wrong and right. They're both important, but they're going to be the one on the front line having to translate hard decisions to people that care about their individual payout and individual attainment. And I want to make sure that there's somebody that, like, I can't tell you how many times with our CRO or other sales leaders where he and I will just get on the phone. We'll talk about, hey, we're going to go into this initiative. This is how we're going to drive volume into the pipe. This is when we want a seller to work that. This is when we don't. And this is how we want to bundle it. And literally look at each other and say, yeah, and we'll figure out the sales compensation design on that later. Right now, let's just get it to market and we will figure out the details when we get there. Do I have a good enough relationship with that leader, and do I trust them to walk that line well? Once you get to that point, we have specific decision authority between me and the sales leaders. A lot of times, I'm the approver of many, many, many things, but I don't even have to do that very often because I'm just really think tightly with the sales leaders. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think the hallmark of a really good CFO CRO relationship is when the CRO is bringing ideas to you, as a sounding board, not am I going to get like I said earlier, jammed up by this guy because I'm bringing him a half-baked idea. They look at you as a thought partner.
Yeah. We have initiatives that we're working on now where we're thinking about how we're going to pull together products. And I'm trying to think through how the accounting is going to be. And I'm trying to build the product in such a way that lands on a model that can lead to it making the most possible money for sales. It's not because I'm trying to make salespeople rich. It's because I know if they don't have the maximum ability to get upside out of it, the revenue momentum is never going to pick up from it. So I'm being, kind of mercenary in that. I want to take care of them because if they're not excited, there'll be no oxygen in it and it's just going to fizzle.
The other side of the coin, some sales leaders don't work out. I'm sure we've all hired or worked with some who talked a big game and it didn't end up working. Are there any red flags that people can identify earlier on that it may not work?
For me, it's if I feel like I'm having a conversation with a very senior account executive rather than a sales leader, that's a big red flag for me. Because then I'm just going to be at war with them all the time about efficiencies and how things should be, how much they should cost, how we build plans. That's pretty rare, though, in my experience, certainly at an executive level.
Cool.
Most of the sales executives I've worked with have been really, really great. A lot of times, though, sales leaders get really good in certain sectors and they know certain sectors really well. I think it'd be very different. Selling as a consumer product sales leader is about getting shelf space in the twice a year shelf resets and how do you use trade funds. That's very, very specific to CPG. That's radically different than software. You know what I mean? So I think it's that's why I think they start to tend to develop sector specialties.
I want to pull the marketing angle into this. This is a master class, Daniel, so far, and just how to work with sales leaders, how to set commission plans. Multi-touch attribution models. You got any takes on those? Are they overkill?
So I was attached at the hip to marketing at P&G for a long time, and working with them, it made me understand why so many CEOs have come out of P&G's brand marketing team, because they are some of the most data savvy, technical, well-trained people that I've ever worked with before. And so I'm really glad that I spent time with them. In consumer products, there's a reason why AC Nielsen has such a big business, because they have market mix modeling. And it's MMM. I always forget which of the M's stands for what.
There's a lot of M's in there.
My brother-in-law works for 3M, so I always get confused. But it's essentially kind of like the early versions of multi-touch attribution. Well, MTA models at their best are really just fancy black box packaging around multivariate regression. right? That's at its core, that's really what it is. The more the data points you have longitudinally and in volume, the tighter you're going to get your R-square on a multivariate regression, right? So if you look at Nielsen, it's going to make a lot of sense why like they, the error factor when you're doing regression analysis is how much they would attribute to just the general air cover of brand spend. And like you want to really go down a rabbit hole, have a conversation with the CMO about the value of brand spend rather than demand gen. It's valuable, but how you quantify that, you can use aided awareness, unaided awareness. It's really, really difficult to do it. But the tricky thing about multi-touch attribution, which makes me not a big fan about it, is not usually, but often, there's a huge incentive for folks that are involved in building pipeline to snipe at each other for credit on who sourced leads. Okay. And in my mind, a lot of ways, multi-touch attribution models just give them a more scientific, fancy sounding way of sniping at each other over who should get credit over the lead. And so like, for me, it's like, look, they're valuable because I don't care where the lead came from. I actually care more about funnel progression in some ways than I do about funnel sourcing, right? Because you may have one channel that's really a mid-funnel tactic that doesn't source a lot of leads, but it may be your most important one. I think you can pick like overlay models. There's like W models where you have like certain weighted channel attribution that you can do that kind of becomes a Switzerland, declare an outcome and be done with it. But I think we spend a lot of time on this stuff when it's not precise. And sometimes, best becomes the enemy of just get a little better, And my company's not been best in class in sales and marketing efficiency. I think that's empirical. When you look at the data, it's something we've really been focused on and we need to get better at. So it's something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about over the last few years.
I can tell. And if I play back what I'm hearing, it sounds like the way you manage your funnel has to mature as your company matures.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, it's interesting. Like if you look at our company at BigCommerce, our roots were in small business SaaS, which is fundamentally like high velocity, low average selling price sales model. And it's a lot of constant prospect turnover. As you move up market and you get larger and larger in the SaaS world, it's much more about expansion of existing customers and figuring out how to do that efficiently. It's less about new account acquisition. And so in our business, for a lot of years, our growth was disproportionately driven by new account acquisition. And so when interest rates turned rational, which by the way, nobody under the age of 30 has worked in a rational interest rate environment. And so I feel like that's a whole other topic of conversation because it's like culture shock for them when all of a sudden buying decisions make sense. Anyway, now all of a sudden your cost of acquisition goes up. There are fewer new accounts to chase. Now all of a sudden you need to be running an expansion play that's normal, right? But if your models are focused on just from the marketing side, where did the lead come from? Well, what if it's an existing account and you're just expanding it? You should have almost no marketing involvement in that, hardly at all, other than maybe thought leadership stuff. That's more sales channel driven. But you can have one channel that's much more marketing driven and another that's more sales channel driven. If they're just spending time bickering over top of funnel for new accounts, that seems like it's just a waste of time, in my opinion.
How do you think finance then can set up measurement systems that promote more productive collaboration between sales and marketing instead of like these turf wars?
I have forbid presentations to include first touch channel attribution. I don't want to see it. Like our CRO and CMO did a great job organizing the demand gen teams and sellers. So they're all in one team, and pipelines measured by sales accepted lead phase dollarized pipeline. So everything above funnel above that, we make some assumptions. We track where it's coming from because we look at ROI and try to pay attention to it. But I don't set financial plan targets at that level. I set the targets down funnel so that where it goes in above it matters, but only for the CMO and CRO to understand how leads are progressing. I'm not grading people and their careers aren't being affected by what the measurement system is that I set in the financial plan by putting it so high up in the funnel that it contributes to that bickering.
That is such a great lesson for people out there who have to come up with these plans, because it's kind of like, however you scaffold this plan, it's where you deploy resources against, measure against, like that's where the action is going to take place.
And where you set targets, right? Like you have to track leads, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, sales accepted leads. Like you need to track in software the whole funnel progression. But I'm not giving targets anywhere above the level of the bottom of the funnel, because as soon as I do, and I've done this wrong in the past, it changed, right?
Yeah.
I'm just convinced that you put it down funnel to where everybody's working further down funnel, and then let the CMO track like what's sourcing, influencing all of the rest of it. But as soon as wherever finance sets a target, everybody will be paranoid to hit. And the gravity starts to shift to whatever is the unit of measure finance sets in its annual operating plan. And so I just think it's really important for CFOs to be really cognizant of the fact that the way the targets get deployed has a cultural impact, has a measurement impact. It affects how people treat each other and the way that they behave. And so I kind of just deliberately try to set targets at places that takes as much of that kind of internecine bickering out of it as possible and kind of leads to better collaboration.
This is an excellent transition to talk about the metrics that matter. What's the difference between input metrics and output metrics?
So an output metric would be bookings. Okay, cool. And you could just say, oh, well, your input metric is pipeline. Okay, well, that's oversimplified. Where's the pipeline coming from, right? What's progressing it? What have been the touch points? Because your conversion rates will be different depending upon all of those different things. So like if you're looking at churn, for example, churned accounts is an output metric. Number of accounts that have uploaded a product catalog within 30 days of signing up, that's an input metric. Right? Sometimes it's one of those things like you have to do some pretty decent data analysis to understand what's really kind of predictive. But I think the stuff that matters the best, like I think Amazon is pretty legendary at being really good at this, that they track input metrics. They don't spend a lot of time focusing on output metrics. And I think to the extent that you can measure input metrics well, you can make a good line of causality between it and the output metric, then put as much of the center of gravity on the input metrics that matter, then the outputs will follow ultimately. Like, for example, like we started focusing on, we want to make a lot of improvements in working capital management, right? So like last year, my company, we had twice as much of an improvement in cash flow as we did in profit because we had a ton of improvements in working capital. How do we do that? Well, we wanted to focus on prepayment and how we were billing. So I didn't set targets around working capital changes. I set targets on sales rep deal close rates at different levels of prepayment. And then I built the sales comp plan to incentivize reps that the better working capital treatment we would end up with, they got better accelerators. And then, my experience, most sales reps are coin operated. So give them an incentive to get deals with better working capital treatment. And then lo and behold, we're doing great on cash flow, right? Because that's designing comp plans around input metrics for working capital. But to affect the working capital, I started with sales comp plans.
A lot of teams are great at identifying the output metric that's wrong, but they're not as good at tracing it back to figure out what's wrong with the input.
It's really hard. It's really hard because also like it involves more opinion, right? Like each function may affect one input metric more than another. And so it's in their like best interest to like make their input metrics seem more important than someone else's, either to gobble resources or get attention. It's a signal noise problem. It can be really difficult to do. I don't know that I'm great at it. Like I try a lot to focus on it. It's a big area of focus within our company, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm the greatest person in the world, but we're trying.
What's the most common misdiagnosis you see in SaaS go-to-market models?
I would say mistaking macro trends for being good or being bad. Ooh. It's exogenous versus endogenous, right? So like, for example, we IPO'd a commerce company during a pandemic. Not a great time if you're looking for nice, stable macro conditions to go out on as a public company, right? Well, okay, during the pandemic, everybody in commerce was seeing really, really, really good growth rates. And you can look at that as a company and say, wow, we're really, really, really good, right? We had missteps during that time, right? And some of it, I've even talked to our employees about this, where we had some of those problems, they were masked by the tailwinds that we saw during the pandemic. And it delayed us making some hard changes that I would argue and a lot of this is on me, right? Like I think we could have done earlier than we have done now, right? And so I think that you can end up sometimes patting yourself on the back as if you're really good, when sometimes you either got lucky or you're in the right place at the right time, or conversely, you can really think everything's going really, really poorly because you're focused on output metrics, but you ignore exogenous factors like what's going on in the macroeconomy, right? And then all of a sudden, but you may be fixing everything going on within that system. And then as soon as the outside stuff turns around, that's out of your control, all of a sudden, everything's working great. because you were doing the hard work because you were paying attention to what you can control.
I often look at benchmark metrics from different periods. And let's say everybody's growing at 40%. I'm just making up a number here. Your execution, though, is only contributing 20% to that. The other 20% is just the market tailwinds and how the environment's set up for you. And then you compare that to another period in time, everyone's growing 15%. But like you are hustling your ass off and you are out executing at every turn. And it just doesn't really show up because the baseline's being pulled down by what's going on for everybody else.
Whenever I talk to employees about this type of stuff, because I usually find like when you're going through a lot of change, like we are, helping everybody understand why makes it easier to accept change. So usually when I do sessions with employees, I use housing as an analogy a lot. One, because I love real estate by background, but also I just find most people can relate to things that is housing. The dynamic that you just described, you can have the same exact house in a really great neighborhood and in an okay neighborhood, and the same house in a better neighborhood is going to go for more money. The person who built the house may have worked harder on the one in not quite as good a neighborhood. Sometimes stocks just happen to be in a sector that's growing really, really fast. They may not be executing as well as the company that's in an area that's not growing as fast. That stock is going to have a valuation. Now, I don't know, you're going to make more money on that stock because it's always versus your cost basis. So it's always relative, right? But I think you just, try to contextualize as best you can and just focus on the execution and the stuff that you can control.
That's also why I think it's funny when people compare like, oh, we should use this framework from Google. And you look at it, it's like a framework that they were using in 2010 that it's like, well, they had $40 billion in free cash flow that I'm sure like any framework kind of worked.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like most of our competitors are larger than us. And so you've got to have concentration of force and what's relevant to you for exactly where you are in the moment, and mimicking other people that are different industries or bigger than you or completely different conditions. Just because it worked for Google doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
Yeah. I'm thinking about your housing reference again. That was a really good analog.
I mean, I find it's helpful, but I mean, small companies even like can compete with big companies in really interesting ways. Like I remember I worked on the oral care business at Procter & Gamble for a really long time.
Like toothpaste?
Yeah. Like Crest, Oral-B. Yeah. I was on that run for quite a while when I was there. And Sensodyne just did great. They were owned by GlaxoSmithKline and they were growing like crazy. And it was like, I never understood why in the heck they're a smaller player. Why are they grabbing so much share? But they had a really interesting strategy. And I've since like kind of tried to mimic that strategy and other stops along the way. Basically what they did is they said, look, I can't compete with Colgate or Procter & Gamble in terms of scale, budget, all the rest of the stuff, but I can own sensitive teeth. I am going to be associated as a brand with sensitive teeth. And once I am 100% associated as the one that owns sensitive teeth, I'm going to convince the whole freaking country that they have sensitive teeth. And then I'm going to take share from everybody else. And it's just like, there's ways you can do that like may have nothing to do with your business, but the principle of like owning a segment and then convincing everyone that they belong in that segment, that is applicable. But me saying like, I'm going to take principles from Google's ad business and say that automatically is analogous to the business that I run, I don't know. That's maybe a bit of a bigger leap for me.
Daniel, I can tell you care a lot about your employees in educating them. You'd mentioned why it's important to talk about the why. I want to go a step further on that. So what's the power in explaining to employees how the company makes money?
Okay, so you talk about input metrics and output metrics, right? Yeah. I want to, like I've said to our investors a lot, like what I just described to you about like that our business model was like growth was overly weighted towards new account acquisition. And we need to get better at expanding existing accounts. That's a big change in how we've been operating. We need to change how we approach our CRM. We need to change how we design the products, things that used to be all in one. We need to have pay-gated features. A lot of our competitors do better than us at this. But it's different than how the company has operated. The output metric that I want is net revenue retention. The output metric that I want is growth in revenue, right? Well, what's the input metric in that case? I can't get employees excited to change the company to do those things if they don't understand how cohorts work. If they don't understand what a cohort is, like at the end of the day, a SaaS business, I think, is one of the simplest business models in the world, right? It's just cohort maximization. It's simple math, right? It's like 8th grade math applied in complex ways. So I literally just did all hands trainings, got all our employees together. It was optional, but I still got hundreds of people that came and just said, look, I'm just going to explain cohorts. And then I literally just put graphs on the screen and be like, tell me about this business looking at this cohort chart. And got to a point where employees could nail it and be like, okay, that business has got a churn problem. they're not expanding. Ooh, they're probably not profitable because they're too weighted on new account acquisition. And then I flashed our graphs on screen and just didn't tell them it was us. And lo and behold, my employees are saying issues that company's having. And I could have told them we had those issues, and I have, but then explain cohorting, and they're like, oh, wait, I get it. I need to design the product differently. I need to focus on existing accounts and set up territories differently. Now they're applying that problem to their specific expertise area, and you start to see the benefits in expansion and net revenue retention. Does that make sense? Like, I find that like we really overestimate the financial acumen of our teammates. Like things that I just take for granted as being just simple math stuff if you're a CFO. And if you can't teach it well, if you can't use everyday terms in order to explain it, like it's really empowering if you understand how a company makes money. Because ultimately, like people are in business because they want to run a business. I found we've just had really good responsiveness from our employees by being really transparent about it.
Daniel, I think that's powerful too, because the way that you monetize your business, it permeates throughout all the departments. It's what you build, it's what you sell, and it's how you track it. And if you can't trust people to be adults and kind of put their mind towards the way that you explain it, maybe it's a problem in how we as finance leaders explain it, that we don't understand it well enough to make it simple, but you need to empower them with that.
Yeah, it gets back to the principle that, like I said, about like the one pagers at Procter & Gamble, right? Where it's like, if you can't explain this concisely in a one page document, maybe you're the problem. Maybe you're the one that actually doesn't understand it. I just find like our team, like they're adults. They want to be told the truth. If there are problems, they can see the problems. If they see opportunities, they can see the opportunities. I think that CFOs can actually be very empowering as a culture leader, as a transparency leader, because then all of a sudden with one, I feel like I say no for a living. Like that's part of my job, is to be the one just telling people no. But then when you tell them no, they understand the why. And then I think it's better for culture. And ultimately in the long run, I think it's better for results.
How much of your job do you think is translating the macro outside the four walls to the micro inside it?
Not a ton, because I tend to not want employees to be too distracted by it. Now, there's some exceptions to that. Like, a couple years ago when we were like every quarter, I do a call with all employees where I just walk through the prior quarterly results. I share feedback that we're getting from the sell side. And then like I use that as a time to talk about different issues in the business that we're working on, right? And I remember for a long time I had a scatter plot, because I'm a nerd, right? We're all nerds. If you're in finance, like you're a nerd. So I had like a scatter plot that I always tracked that showed just on one axis, it showed like revenue growth rate, and the other axis showed profit margin. And when everybody was burning cash, everybody was up and to the left, where it was like high growth, but burning cash. And then over a 1 year period, all the scatter plots shifted to the other direction. And so I would show that all the time as context for employees, be like, look, what we're going through to tighten belts and change the way we do things, it's not just us. Everybody's having to do this. And I think it was like good context for everybody. I think that type of stuff is really empowering. That's like the only version of the macro that I would get into. Like I'm not getting up in front of our employees and talking about what I think about tariffs and how it's going to affect commerce and how it's going to flow through our business. When I get questions, I actually just say, listen to our earnings call. Like I address it there. I don't want people distracted by crap they can't control.
You did make a fascinating comment earlier, though, that most employees under 30 haven't worked in a rational interest rate environment. How does that affect how you lead the company, and what messages do you try to impart?
I think it's sometimes, maybe it's because I love teaching. Probably why I wanted to be a pastor back in the day. Like I love teaching. I think it's really cliche, but information is powerful. And so if you have never worked in a rational interest rate environment, people make buying decisions very differently. They're much more discerning when they make decisions. Companies have to be a lot more careful with the types of benefits they offer. They have to be much more frugal. It's harder to close deals. It can be harder to find jobs, but that's actually normal, right? What the last few years are what was abnormal. And so I think it's like almost an extension of the education process for folks that are earlier on in their career, just to get through it. Like when I got out of undergrad, within 6 months, the .com bubble burst. And I remember it was like being on the cube farm at Dell, and half the people on the floor were day traders. And all of a sudden their Dell stock was tanking and they're panicked. And I'm like, aren't you supposed to be on the phone, like selling something? Why are you on E-Trade all the time? Well, it's because they were spoiled, right? Because they've been making so much money on the stock. And so that was like my first experience in that career. And then going through layoffs and all that kind of shakes you. And then getting out of grad school or after Lehman Brothers goes under. And I think sometimes there's also this perspective that, We need to help people that are experiencing these things for the first time. Until you've experienced cyclicality, you don't realize that things come back. And I think it can become really discouraging. I think it can be demotivating, but it can also make people think the company is being unfair when all of a sudden the company is having to be more frugal. And the more that you can educate people and treat them like adults, I think they tend to respond pretty well. That's
an amazing perspective right there. And time is a pendulum in a lot of respects.
I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, it was in Ecclesiastes written thousands of years ago. Like it's the thing.
Speaking about learning, you're a first-time CFO of a public company. So how has mentorship played a role in your development?
It's been huge. I'm really, really blessed and fortunate to have folks on our board that have mentored me. Like actually, even before I stepped into the role, talked to them about that. And our audit chair in particular is outstanding. And even like when I'll talk to different board members, we'll say like, I'll tell them like, this is a board conversation or this is just a mentoring conversation and I need your input, right? And almost have them as like two different frames when we have that conversation because I'm kind of incapable of BS. And, I know that I don't know things. And like, you and I talked about before, like our investors do not have time for my learning curve and they're not here to fund my personal growth and development. Like my job is to maximize the value of their asset. And so I think mentorship has been gigantic because it's given me safe spaces to voice what I don't know. Now, if I'm asking the same question 3 times in a row, there's a problem, right? Like, you can ask it once, ask it twice, then you need to be kind of decisively learning and moving on. And that's on me. But I think like the combination of really good mentorship and never BSing. There's a proverb in the Old Testament that I love. It says, even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent and discerning if he holds his tongue, which is a fancy way of saying people are going to assume you're smart if you just shut up. As soon as you open your mouth and you don't know what the hell you're talking about, everybody's going to know. And so like, I think I've just kind of been like, if I have questions, I will not BS. I would rather say nothing than say something wrong and stupid. But then I have people that I know and trust that are invested in me doing well that I can call and ask stupid questions to and learn as quickly as I possibly can.
Well, speaking of opening your mouth, bankers, investors, third parties are never shy to give CFOs advice. How do you balance that? And have you gotten better at taking feedback over time?
In general, I tend to not take things too personally. I take the performance of the company personally.
Ooh.
Right? But I don't take what people say about me or to me personally. Right? Like my job is to maximize the value of the asset. If at any point our shareholders or board decides that somebody else is better to maximize the value of the asset, I should go. And I accept that and I'm totally fine with it. And so like when I talk to investors, some of the whoopings I've gotten from investors have been some of the best feedback I've had about how to run a business, how to think about it. Sometimes what they say is completely self-benefiting, right? Like you kind of have to know their trading strategy, how they're approaching things. And sometimes you have to kind of like filter their advice. But just because people are harsh doesn't mean they're wrong. Like I was a cold calling enterprise salesperson in New York City, for heaven's sake, in my 20s. Like I used to have a Southern accent. I lost it because I couldn't make quota because they assumed if you had an accent, you were an idiot. And then they wouldn't buy anything from you. New Yorkers are great because they'll just punch you in the face. They don't dislike you. They're just in a rush and they need to get to the point. And so like I find investors, I tell our team all the time, getting punched in the face by smart people is a blessing. And so like I think like that way about feedback from investors. Now, if they're giving you terrible advice because it's completely self-serving, that's different. You need to listen, nod your head, be respectful and say, I'll take it into account and then not do that thing. But if they call you an idiot, okay, they own shares. They're entitled to that opinion. If they think I'm that big of an idiot, maybe I should go. And they have the right to say that too, because they're the ones that own the company,
Well said. That was a clip right there. Wow. All right. We're going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So I ask every
long ass lightning round. Okay.
Yeah.
So I got to be quick. I
call it that because you don't have to be that quick, but it's meant to be quick. So,
all right, cool.
What's an example of something you've screwed up on the job before? It could be in any role.
Oh my God. Where do I begin? I remember when I was in sales, I got a new manager and I remember I sat down for my first performance review with her and she looked at me and she said, hey, I got to tell you, like before I took over the team, I heard so many great things about you, how talented you are. You're an up and comer. You've worked for me now for about 6 months. I got to say, I'm not impressed.
Oh my goodness. From the top rope.
She's like, I think you're really overrated. And she said, the reason for that is because you're so busy chasing big deals, you miss the small ones. You either hit 50% of your number or you hit 150% of your number. I need you to be between 90 and 120 every single quarter. You just chase shiny objects all the freaking time, and I need you to be more consistent. She was right. She was 100% right. Again, getting punched in the face by smart people is a blessing. I've also had a tendency in the past to, similar vein, struggle with staying in my lane. And so like, just think so big picture about all the things going wrong in the company that I could miss earlier in my career, like miss small things. And you just can't do that. Like I tell my teams all the time now, like, do not talk to me about strategy. Like when you do your practice correctly and well and reliably, then we can talk about things outside of your lane. So you earn the right to go outside of your lane by doing the small things repeatedly and very, very, very well. I get really militant about that now because I've screwed that up so much in the past.
If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
Careerism is a trap.
Ooh.
Careerism is a trap.
What's careerism?
That thing that makes you have the first question you ask someone when you meet them be, so what do you do? That part of you that makes you ask that question, that's careerism. It's defining yourself according to whatever freaking ladder you feel somehow your life's mission is to climb. I could quote a million other proverbs on that one and how big of a trap that is. But if I could go back, especially the dude in my mid 30s, I'd say probably it's just a trap. Like, I will be in this role as long as the board thinks I'm doing a good job, right? And I'm still me, and I still love my wife the second they make the decision otherwise. As soon as you start to base your identity on this stuff, like I bust my butt all the time. Like I just working hard. Like our family motto is Lentz's work hard. My kids could repeat that at the age of 5. Like that's just who we are, but it's different. It's not my identity, you know? And I think it's just, I think it's really dangerous. It's like a distinctively white collar trap.
This is a really good reminder that I needed right now. So I'm in my mid 30s. We just moved to a new town. We're trying to make friends in town. And a lot of the friends we're making are through the daycares that our daughters go to.
Yeah.
And I'm trying not to make like in the first 10 minutes, even 30 minutes about careers.
Just don't do it. It's just because it also like it sends a message to people. Right. Like my wife's a social worker, right? She's the most incredible person that I know. She doesn't make anything, right? But like every day I come home and she's talking about her work day and she's like helping families find housing because they're borderline homeless. Who gives a crap about the fact that I got yelled at by this person or that person? Like my wife's the one who's doing, in my opinion, something more valuable. But when you like talk to someone and you automatically make it start with, so where are you on the ladder that you've chosen? It's just, I don't know. I think it does bad things to people's psychology too.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's great advice. More of a technical question. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done?
We use Workday for forecasting, Intact and other tools for accounting. I like Workday a lot. We used to use a different tool that we got off. I got into a dispute about the bill and I promised never to say anything negative about them in exchange for a compromise on what we owed them. Let's just say I'm much better on Workday than on some of the other tools that we've used in the past. I think a really interesting space is how people are starting to use AI in operations. And like the last 6 months, I've gone from like dinosaur-like skepticism to being a pretty big believer in a pretty rapid space of time. And there's a tool out there we're implementing now called Make. Most prosaic name I've ever heard of in my life, but it's an interesting concept where it allows you to basically use AI to populate things within your go-to-market stack, but have the reps not know that it was coming from AI rather than directly from the sales and marketing stack. So for example, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that you can do with AI where you can actually, we're prototyping some of the stuff, but you can actually like enter in a prospect and use AI to scrape the internet and understand what platforms they're on, how has it been customized, who's in their tech stack, all this stuff. And you can pair it up with 6 Sense and other tools to understand intent. But then you can take those things and then have it pop up as fields in Salesforce whenever a rep is first looking at that prospect, right? Now that's still conceptual, but that's like where things are going and where things are moving. It's really cool, actually. I think like 6 months from now, I don't know when it would be exactly, but it'd be really worthwhile to just dig into a little bit of just like how rapidly all of the different software vendors and back office are building out AI capabilities, because also how much they can be disrupted by stuff that's openly available. It's moving fast. It's very fascinating.
Any other AI use cases that have caught your eye?
Yes, Codex is interesting to supplement engineering and coding. Still testing it. We'll see. The notion that it can replace developers, I just don't buy. I think about it a lot more as it's like, when somebody had like a hammer versus like one of those like pneumatic hammers that are just shooting nails in, I'd rather think of these things as like ways to help employees become a lot more productive.
Yeah.
Allow reps to spend more time on the phone rather than documenting the MedPick framework or whatever they're using in sales operations, right? That's really interesting. But I mean, we're using it obviously to deflecting calls out of technical support. Developer documentation is interesting. There's some tools now that Get's putting out somewhere. It can actually look at your developer documentation, link it to the base code, and then whenever an engineer changes the code, it can flag to your dev docs team that they're now dislocated from the underlying code and flag that you need to update the developer documentation. So we're testing some of that stuff. There's just a lot of really, really interesting use cases that are out there. It's not all about deep research and, random stuff on ChatGPT. But a lot of it, though, still I have questions about how do you scale it? Is it secure? Like I run I'm CFO of a public company. Yeah. So if it doesn't get past my security sniff test, it doesn't make it any further.
To your point around like replacing reps or replacing engineers, like I think it's more powerful to look at it like how can I make someone who's a B like an A- really quickly? How can I pull the medium up?
Yeah, or how can I make it to where like there are fewer bugs, right? Or they're able to spend more time using their creativity in their trade and less time bug hunting. You know what I mean? Like I think there's a lot of things like that can really be enabling for people. I think there's a little bit of FUD and uncertainty out there right now. Just people, how many like reports are out there about how this is going to nuke the entire white collar job sector?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know if I buy all that, but I don't know. Some of the use cases I'm seeing are really pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
Their personal parking in San Francisco, like their monthly parking. That was one. Although I remember 2 stories when I was in sales, like you got paid a per diem for driving.
Yeah.
One thing I really miss about sales, the people are just uniformly funnier than finance. I just would go home from like dinners with my colleagues just laughing, really wrong. Like I feel bad too, but it was also like really funny. I remember one time, like we were on like a call, we were going through our forecast and the sales manager is asking him about where they're going to come in for the quarter. And this guy's like, well, I not having such a good quarter. So I'm driving in circles, 34 cents a mile, going to get to my number. Like, it was just like, it's so hilarious. And then like, I had another guy tell me, it was like, he actually had an employee one time. He was like in a convertible driving and like the dude was wearing a hat and the hat flies off. And, the rep looks at his boss and is just like, wow, shit, I'm going to have to go expense that hat.
Yeah.
And the manager just goes, the hell you say? Like, you can't expense that. And then like a week later, my boss told me the guy like walks in and like slips his expense report across the desk and just goes, find the hat. So like, like you can always do stuff like that and do the monkey business. But my personal favorite was the guy driving in circles in Long Island. Like, just like, get to my number, 34 cents, it gets me there, I'm on my way to Montauk. You're like, what the hell are you talking about?
I can picture him too.
Oh my God, it was so funny. Like I worked with guys named like Vinny and Paul.
Yeah.
And it was, for the guy from Temple, Texas, it was like a cultural experience. I had to lose the accent quick.
Daniel, this has been such a pleasure. Thanks for carving out time for us and sharing all your experiences.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. Thanks for inviting me.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.